On a humid August morning in 1847, at Ryan's Mart in Charleston, South Carolina, something happened that would become the most whispered about scandal in Carlton County for the next 60 years. For the lowest bid ever recorded at that auction house, $5, a planter named Samuel Rutledge purchased a woman the auctioneer had described as unmarketable for any purpose but field labor. Within 18 months, she would become the most sought-after woman in 3 counties. Her presence at Rutledge's plantation spawned dozens of unexplained visits from Charleston's most prominent men. By 1850, 7 wealthy planters had made offers to purchase her, each bid mysteriously rejected. The strangest part, no one could agree on what she actually looked like. Some visitors described her as disfigured beyond recognition. Others claimed she was the most beautiful woman they had ever seen. When Samuel Rutledge died under suspicious circumstances in 1851, the woman vanished the same night. And the truth behind what happened at Magnolia Bend Plantation was buried with such determination that even county records from that period mysteriously disappeared from 3 separate archives. What you are about to hear has been reconstructed from private journals, letters found in attic trunks, and testimony given in sealed court proceedings, documents that were never meant to see daylight. Before we continue with the story of the woman known only as Number 39, if this story has already captured your attention, make sure you are subscribed to Liturgy of Fear so you never miss another dark mystery from America's hidden past. Hit that notification bell and leave a comment telling us what state or city you are listening from. We love hearing where our audience discovers these forgotten stories. Now, let us return to Charleston, South Carolina, in the summer of 1847, to understand how an auction that should have taken 30 seconds would change lives and destroy reputations for decades to come. The auction houses of Charleston had seen every kind of human transaction by the mid-1840s. Ryan's Mart, located between Chalmers and Queen Streets, processed hundreds of sales each month. Men, women, and children were displayed in its high-walled courtyard before crowds of planters, factors, and speculators. The building itself was unremarkable: whitewashed brick walls that held the summer heat, a raised platform where the auctioneer conducted business, and narrow rooms in the back where people waited in chains for their turn under the crowd's scrutiny. The smell of sweat, fear, and Charleston's sulphurous harbor air created an atmosphere that regular attendees learned to ignore, though visitors from the north often had to step outside. Colleton County, where Samuel Rutledge maintained his plantation, stretched inland from Charleston along the Edisto River, a landscape of rice fields, pine forests, and plantations with names that appeared on maps like territorial claims: Whitehall, Fenwick Hall, Middleton Place. By 1847, the county's economy revolved entirely around rice and cotton, crops that demanded enormous amounts of labor and made fortunes for those who could manage large operations efficiently. The wealthy families, Ravenels, Hughes, Petrus, Gettys, formed an interconnected web of marriages, business partnerships, and social obligations that governed everything from church pews to political appointments. Samuel Rutledge occupied an awkward position in this hierarchy. At 43 years old, he owned Magnolia Bend, a middling plantation of 800 acres with 42 enslaved workers and debts that mounted each year despite relatively good harvests. His wife, Catherine, had died in 1844 during a yellow fever outbreak, leaving him with 2 daughters, Louisa, 17, and Margaret, 14, whose marriage prospects required careful management. Samuel was known for his rigid frugality, a trait that had earned him respect but limited affection among his peers. He rarely attended Charleston's social events, preferring the company of account books and agricultural journals. His overseer, a thick-necked man named William Priolo, handled the daily operations with an efficiency that bordered on cruelty, a quality Samuel neither encouraged nor discouraged. The summer of 1847 had been particularly oppressive, with temperatures rising past 90 degrees day after day and the rice fields breeding mosquitoes in swarms that made evening walks impossible. Samuel's financial situation had deteriorated over the previous winter when a shipping delay forced him to sell his cotton crop at depressed prices. He needed workers. 2 of his field hands had died of pneumonia in March, and the planting season had revealed his workforce was stretched too thin. But he could not afford the going rate for healthy young men, which regularly exceeded $1,000. He traveled to Charleston in August with a budget of $50, hoping to find older workers or those with minor disabilities who could still contribute to the plantation's operations. The auction on August 12 began at 10 in the morning. Samuel arrived early, standing in the shade of the mart's eastern wall while studying a handbill listing that day's offerings. 23 people would be sold, ranging from a blacksmith estimated to bring $1,500 to several children whose value depended entirely on whether they would be purchased with their mothers. Samuel's attention focused on the older listings, a man of 50 with a hernia, a woman of 45 described as reliable for housework despite a limp. These were the slaves no one else wanted, the ones that might fit his budget. The auctioneer, Thomas Gadsden, was a professional who had been conducting sales for 15 years. He knew how to read a crowd, how to build excitement for valuable merchandise, and how to dispose quickly of the unfortunate ones who drew no interest. The morning proceeded predictably. The blacksmith sold for $1,400. A young woman with her infant for $900. 2 adolescent boys together for $1,600. Samuel watched without bidding, waiting for the prices to fall to his range. Shortly after noon, when the crowd had thinned to perhaps 30 men still seeking bargains, Gadsden called for number 39 to be brought forward. Samuel later wrote in his private journal that something in the auctioneer's voice had changed in that moment, a note of distaste that he normally concealed behind professional detachment. The woman who emerged from the back rooms moved slowly, her head covered by a burlap sack that extended past her shoulders. 2 attendants guided her up the platform steps, and she stood absolutely still, making no sound. "This one requires special consideration," Gadsden announced, his usual theatrical warmth replaced by clipped efficiency. "She is 24 years of age, strong constitution, no known illnesses. Previous owner acquired her in an estate settlement and requests we make clear she has been kept isolated due to appearance. She is capable of field labor or any work requiring no public interaction. Starting bid is $10. The crowd's attention sharpened. Estate settlements usually meant older slaves or those with documented problems, but isolation due to appearance suggested something unusual. Several men moved closer to the platform. One called out, asking to see the woman's face. Gadsden hesitated, a hesitation that Samuel noticed because, in all the auctions he had attended, he had never seen the auctioneer pause before displaying merchandise. "The seller," Gadsden said carefully, "has instructed that her face remain covered until purchase is complete. I am authorized to tell you she sustained severe scarring in a fire during childhood. She is fully functional and has vision in both eyes. However, her appearance is markedly disfigured. The seller believes this is sufficient disclosure." What happened next became the subject of argument among those present. Some men immediately lost interest and drifted toward the exit, unwilling to purchase someone they could not fully examine. Others remained, intrigued by the mystery or calculating whether a severely disfigured worker might be valuable precisely because she would not attract the attention that created complications on plantations. A few men laughed, making crude jokes about fire damage and questioning whether anyone would bid even $5 for damaged goods. The bidding stalled at $10, then $9. When no one responded, Gadsden dropped his voice. $8. Surely someone needs a field hand. She is strong, young, will give you years of work. $7. $6. His face had flushed red, whether from heat or embarrassment Samuel could not tell. $5. Do I have $5? Samuel's hand went up. He told himself later it was practicality. $5 for a young, strong worker was an extraordinary value regardless of appearance. Field labor did not require beauty. His overseer could keep her away from the main house if necessary, away from his daughters. It was simply good business. But in his journal entry from that night, written by candlelight after he had returned to Magnolia Bend with his new purchase, he recorded something different. I bid because the silence felt wrong. Because 30 men stood watching a human being offered for $5 and no one moved. Because Gadsden looked as though he wanted to vomit. Because I thought of Catherine and how she would have looked at me if I had stood there and done nothing. God forgive me. I bid out of shame, not sense. Sold to Samuel Rutledge of Magnolia Bend Plantation, Gadsden said quickly, relief evident in his voice. Papers will be ready within the hour. Next offering, number 40, male, age 32, experienced Cooper. Samuel barely heard the rest. He moved toward the Mart's office to complete the transaction, aware of the stares following him. A planter named James Huger, whom Samuel knew slightly from church, caught his arm as he passed. "You have courage or madness, Rutledge. I would not bring something like that onto my land. Some things carry misfortune." Samuel pulled his arm free without responding. But Huger's word stayed with him during the ride back to Colleton County, the woman sitting silent in the back of his wagon, the burlap sack still covering her head because he had not thought to remove it and she had not asked. The August heat pressed down on them as the wagon rolled along the rutted road following the Edisto River. Spanish moss hung from the live oaks like gray shrouds, barely moving in the airless afternoon. Samuel tried twice to start a conversation, asking basic questions. Could she cook? Did she know anything about rice cultivation? Had she ever worked with indigo? But he received only the briefest responses, her voice so quiet he could barely hear it over the wagon wheels. "Yes, sir." "No, sir." "I don't know, sir." Eventually, he gave up, and they completed the journey in silence, broken only by bird calls and the distant sound of insects. Magnolia Bend appeared through the trees as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, a two-story house of weathered white planks with 6 columns and a wide veranda, surrounded by the practical buildings that kept a plantation functioning: kitchen house, smokehouse, storage sheds, stables, and, further back, hidden by a line of cedars, the cabins where the enslaved workers lived. Samuel directed the wagon toward the overseer's house, a modest structure near the cabins where William Priolo maintained his quarters and conducted plantation business. Priolo emerged as the wagon stopped, wiping sweat from his neck with a rag. He was a man of 35 with powerful shoulders and a face that seemed permanently set in an expression of evaluation, measuring everything he saw against some internal standard of usefulness. Samuel explained the purchase briefly: $5 field hand, fire scarring, to be put to work immediately on whatever task needed an extra pair of hands. Priolo circled the wagon, examining his new charge with the same attention he would give to a plow horse, though he made no move to remove the burlap covering. $5, Priolo repeated. What's wrong with her besides the face? Disease? Madness? Insubordination? The auctioneer claimed nothing: young, strong, full vision. Simply unmarketable in appearance. And you believed him? Priolo's skepticism was clear. When has Gadsden ever told the full truth about damaged merchandise? Samuel had no answer to that. He instructed Priolo to assign the woman to whatever work needed doing and find her a cabin space. Then he drove the wagon to the main house, where his daughters waited on the veranda. Louisa had her mother's fair coloring and careful posture. Margaret was darker, more restless, constantly moving even when standing still. Both watched him with questions in their eyes, but he offered no explanations beyond acknowledging he had purchased one new worker to help with the upcoming harvest. That night, Samuel sat in his study with his account books open but found himself unable to focus on the numbers. The $5 purchase bothered him in ways he could not articulate. He kept remembering the silence in the auction yard, the way grown men had stepped back from the platform as though proximity to the woman might somehow contaminate them. And he thought about the burlap sack still covering her face when Priolo had led her away to the cabins. He had not asked to see what was underneath. Neither had Priolo. They had both, by unspoken agreement, chosen not to look. The woman, Samuel realized he had not even asked her name, had not seen it on the bill of sale, had referred to her only as number 39, was assigned to the rice fields the following morning. The plantation's main cash crop required constant attention during the growing season, flooding and draining according to precise schedules, weeding, watching for pests and disease, maintaining the trunks and ditches that controlled water flow. It was back-breaking labor performed in humid heat under clouds of mosquitoes, but it was also labor that kept workers relatively isolated from one another, each person responsible for their section of field. Priolo placed number 39 on the eastern parcel, furthest from the main house and the road, where she would have minimal contact with anyone. For 3 weeks, nothing unusual occurred. The woman worked in silence, apparently as strong as the auctioneer had claimed, completing her assigned tasks without complaint or conversation. The other workers left her alone, whether because of her covered face or simply because Priolo had instructed them to mind their own business. Samuel never learned. He rarely saw her, catching only distant glimpses when he rode out to inspect the fields. The burlap sack remained in place, and Samuel felt grateful he did not have to confront whatever was underneath. Then, on the first Sunday of September, everything changed. Samuel's daughters attended morning services at St. Bartholomew's Church as they did every week. Margaret complained of a headache during the ride home and went directly to her room to rest. An hour later, Louisa found her sister on the bedroom floor, seizing violently, foam at her mouth, eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. Samuel sent immediately for Dr. Henry Middleton, the nearest physician, who lived for miles away on his own plantation. While they waited, Margaret stopped seizing but did not wake, her breathing shallow and irregular, her skin cold despite the heat. Dr. Middleton arrived within 2 hours and examined Margaret thoroughly, checking her pulse, her pupils, her color, listening to her breathing. He asked about her diet, her activities, whether she had complained of pain or illness before the seizure. Samuel told him everything he could remember. Margaret had seemed entirely normal that morning, perhaps a bit quieter than usual, had eaten breakfast without issue, attended church, mentioned a headache. Nothing suggested the crisis that had followed. "I cannot determine a cause," Dr. Middleton admitted after his examination. Sometimes young women experience these episodes due to hysteria or overexcitement, though Margaret has always seemed remarkably steady. "I will leave laudanum for the pain when she wakes and instructions for her care. If she has another seizure, send for me immediately. If she does not wake within 12 hours, he did not finish the sentence. Margaret woke that evening, confused and weak, with no memory of the seizure or the hours that followed. She complained that her headache had worsened, that light hurt her eyes, that she could not remember simple things, the name of their horse, the color of Louisa's church dress, what hymns they had sung that morning. Dr. Middleton had warned these symptoms might occur and recommended rest, darkness, and quiet. But over the following days, Margaret did not improve. The headaches continued, sometimes so severe she could not leave her bed. She had 2 more seizures, each frightening in their violence. Her memory became increasingly unreliable, forgetting conversations from an hour before, calling Louisa by their mother's name, asking when their father would return from Charleston though he sat beside her. Samuel felt himself approaching the edge of an abyss he recognized from the months before Catherine's death, when medicine had failed and he had watched helplessly as yellow fever consumed his wife 1 degree of temperature at a time. He sent for Dr. Middleton again. The physician examined Margaret once more and admitted he was mystified by her condition. "I have seen symptoms like this in patients who have suffered head injuries," he said, "or who have been exposed to certain toxins. But Margaret has experienced neither. I can provide nothing but rest and laudanum and prayer that whatever is affecting her will pass." But it did not pass. By the end of September, Margaret rarely left her bed. Her seizures had become more frequent. Her lucid moments grew shorter, and she had begun to speak about things that had not happened, describing conversations with people who had never visited, mentioning events that had never occurred. Louisa spent hours each day sitting with her sister, bathing her face with cool cloths, reading to her from scripture. Samuel watched his younger daughter disappear inside an illness that had no name and no cure. And for the first time since Catherine's death, he prayed with the desperation of someone who knows prayer is all that remains. It was Louisa who first suggested they should ask about traditional remedies. Some of the enslaved workers, she reminded her father, had knowledge passed down through generations about herbs and treatments that white physicians did not learn. Her mother had consulted with an elderly woman named Rose, now deceased, who had treated various ailments with teas and poultices that had seemed to help when regular medicine failed. Perhaps someone else on the plantation had similar knowledge. Perhaps it was worth trying anything since Dr. Middleton had essentially admitted his methods were useless. Samuel resisted initially. He was a man who believed in science and education, who subscribed to agricultural journals and medical bulletins, who thought superstition was something to be overcome with knowledge. But watching Margaret's decline was eroding his certainties. After Louisa raised the subject a third time, he told Priolo to inquire whether anyone among the workers claimed knowledge of healing practices. The overseer returned the following day with an answer that surprised Samuel. The woman from the auction, number 39, had apparently spent time with someone who practiced herb doctoring. She might know something that could help. Samuel told Priolo to bring the woman to the main house that evening after the fieldwork was finished. The woman arrived at sunset, still wearing the burlap sack over her head and shoulders. Samuel met her on the back veranda, away from the windows where Louisa might see. Priolo stood nearby, his expression suggesting he thought this entire exercise was foolish but was willing to humor his employer's desperation. Samuel explained Margaret's symptoms in detail: the seizures, the memory loss, the headaches, the confusion, the progressive weakness. He asked if the woman knew of anything that might help. The response came in that same quiet voice Samuel had heard only briefly during the wagon ride from Charleston. "I might know something, sir. If you would permit me to see the young lady and ask her some questions." Samuel hesitated. The thought of bringing this woman, whose face he had never seen, who had been described as markedly disfigured, into his daughter's sick room felt wrong in ways he could not articulate. But Margaret was dying. He knew that now, even if Dr. Middleton had been too professional to say it plainly. What did propriety matter if it cost him his child? He led the woman upstairs to Margaret's room, where Louisa sat beside the bed, reading scripture aloud. His older daughter looked up as they entered, and Samuel saw her eyes widen as she took in the burlap-covered figure standing in the doorway. He explained quickly, this woman might know of herbal remedies that could help. He had asked her to examine Margaret, they should try everything possible. Louisa's face showed doubt, but also hope, the combination that came from watching someone you love fade away despite every prayer and medical intervention. The woman approached Margaret's bed slowly, as though trying not to startle her. Margaret lay with her eyes closed, her breathing shallow, her hair damp with sweat despite the evening cool. The woman knelt beside the bed and gently touched Margaret's forehead, her hand dark against the girl's pale skin. Then she spoke, her voice still quiet but with a note of concern that seemed genuine. "Miss Margaret, can you hear me? Can you tell me when the headache started? When you first felt poorly?" Margaret's eyes opened slightly, unfocused and confused. "Mother," she whispered. "Mother. My head hurts so much. When can we go home?" "Soon," the woman said softly. "Soon, child. But first, I need to know some things. Can you remember what you ate before the headaches began? Or if you touched anything that made your skin feel strange, or if you smelled something unusual?" The questions continued for several minutes, gentle and patient, while Margaret drifted between awareness and confusion. Samuel watched, struck by the tone of the woman's voice. It reminded him of how Catherine had spoken to the girls when they were small and frightened, a combination of comfort and strength that made everything seem less terrible. He realized he had been expecting someone damaged, broken, perhaps slow-witted or strange. Instead, the woman's manner suggested education and experience, a calm competence that seemed at odds with her $5 price and the burlap sack covering her face. Finally, the woman stood and asked to speak with Samuel privately. They returned to the veranda where the last light was fading from the western sky. Priolo had disappeared, probably back to his own house for supper. Samuel waited for the woman to speak, noticing for the first time that her hands were not scarred. The skin was smooth, unblemished, her fingers long and well-shaped. If the fire had damaged her face so severely, why had her hands escaped unharmed? "Sir," the woman began, her voice still quiet but firmer now, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be truthful with me because your daughter's life may depend on it. Has anyone given Miss Margaret anything special to eat or drink recently? Any gifts of food or medicine from someone outside your household?" Samuel thought back over the previous weeks. "No. Everything she has eaten has come from our kitchen, prepared by our cook who has been with us for years. Dr. Middleton left laudanum, but that's a standard treatment. Why do you ask? The woman was silent for a moment, and Samuel had the strange impression she was deciding how much to tell him. When she spoke, her words were careful. The symptoms Miss Margaret is experiencing, the seizures, the memory loss, the confusion, the progressive weakness, they are consistent with certain kinds of poisoning. Not food poisoning, but slow poisoning with something that builds up in the body over time. There are plants that can cause these effects. And there are people who know how to use those plants. The words hung in the air between them. Poisoning. Someone deliberately harming his daughter. The idea seemed impossible. Margaret was 14 years old, gentle and kind, beloved by everyone who knew her. Who would want to poison a child? And yet, as Samuel thought about it, he realized the woman's explanation made more sense than anything Dr. Middleton had suggested. Margaret's illness had appeared suddenly but progressed steadily, without the ups and downs of a natural disease. And she had been fine until that Sunday, the first Sunday of September, when something had changed. If you are right, Samuel said slowly, then someone in my household is trying to kill my daughter. That is what you are suggesting. I am suggesting it is possible, sir. I cannot be certain without knowing more. But I have seen symptoms like this before. And they were caused by a plant called white snake root. It grows wild in shaded areas. And if someone knows how to prepare it, small amounts taken over time can cause exactly what Miss Margaret is experiencing. Eventually, it would kill her. And most physicians would never suspect poison because the symptoms mimic other illnesses. Samuel felt cold despite the warm evening. Can you help her? If she has been poisoned, can you save her? If we stop the poisoning immediately, yes, she should recover. The body can eliminate the toxins if no more are introduced. But sir, you need to find who is doing this and stop them, because if my suspicion is correct, they will try again. Samuel asked the obvious question. How do you know these things about poisons and plants and symptoms? The woman's posture changed slightly, a tensing that suggested old pain. I was taught by someone who knew about healing and harm both, sir. Someone who understood that the plants that cure can also kill depending on the dose and the intention. I do not practice poisoning, but I know how to recognize it when I see it. They spoke for another 10 minutes, the woman explaining what should be done. All of Margaret's food should be prepared by someone Samuel trusted absolutely and served to her directly with no opportunity for anyone else to add anything to it. The laudanum should be set aside and not used. Fresh water should be given to her frequently to help flush the toxins from her body. And someone should watch her room at all times, allowing no visitors except family. If these precautions were followed, Margaret should begin to improve within a few days. If she did not, then the woman's theory was wrong and something else was causing the illness. Samuel made arrangements that night. He instructed their cook, Patience, to prepare all of Margaret's meals personally and bring them directly to her room. He told Louisa what the woman had suggested about poisoning, watching his older daughter's face go pale with shock and horror. He asked Priolo to watch for anyone from the plantation who might be going near the main house at unusual times. And he sat in Margaret's room himself that night, unwilling to sleep while his daughter's life hung in the balance. By the third day, Margaret's condition had stabilized. The seizures stopped. The headaches began to lessen. Her memory remained confused, but she seemed more alert, more present. Dr. Middleton called back to examine her, expressed surprise at the improvement, and attributed it to rest and prayer. Samuel did not mention poisoning or the woman from the auction. He simply nodded and thanked the doctor for his care. By the end of the week, Margaret was sitting up in bed and asking for books. By the second week, she was walking around her room, weak but clearly recovering. The change was remarkable, miraculous even. And Samuel knew with absolute certainty that the woman had been right. Someone had been poisoning his daughter. Someone in his household or with access to it. Someone who had stopped only because the opportunity had been removed. He called Priolo to his study and explained the situation. The overseer's face darkened as he listened. You're saying someone tried to murder Miss Margaret, and you want me to find out who? I am saying we need to discover the truth. Start by questioning everyone who has been in the main house over the past 2 months. Kitchen staff, house servants, anyone who delivers supplies. I want to know if anyone has been behaving strangely, asking unusual questions, showing interest in Margaret's activities. The investigation took 3 days. Priolo questioned everyone methodically, and Samuel watched for inconsistencies in their accounts. What emerged was a pattern that chilled him to his core. Several people mentioned that Louisa had been preparing special teas for her sister, herbal mixtures she claimed would help with Margaret's headaches and anxiety. The housekeeper, a woman named Ruth who had worked for the family since before the girls were born, remembered Louisa asking about certain plants that grew wild in the woods near the plantation. Plants with white flowers and a distinctive smell. Plants that Ruth now realized matched the description of white snakeroot the woman from the auction had mentioned. Louisa. His own daughter. The idea was incomprehensible, monstrous. But as Samuel forced himself to think about it with the cold logic he applied to business matters, certain things began to make a terrible sense. Louisa was 17, of an age when she should have been married, but their financial situation had limited her prospects. The better families had daughters of their own they wanted to position advantageously, and the families on their level could not offer Louisa the life she had grown up expecting. Margaret, younger and more vivacious, was already attracting attention from potential suitors despite her age. If Margaret married well, it might actually hurt Louisa's chances. Plantation families often struggled to provide generous dowries for one daughter, much less two. But surely Louisa would not kill her own sister out of jealousy or mercenary calculation. Surely there was another explanation. Samuel confronted his daughter that evening in the parlor after Margaret had gone to bed. He asked her directly about the teas she had been preparing. Louisa's face went white, then red, and she began to cry. But they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of anger and frustration. "You believe that creature over your own daughter?" she demanded. "That woman you brought into our home who hides her face like a monster? She has poisoned your mind against me. Answer the question, Louisa. What was in the teas you gave to Margaret?" "Herbs for headaches. Chamomile and mint and feverfew, things Mother used to use. I was trying to help her because that useless Dr. Middleton does nothing but take your money and leave laudanum. Ruth says you asked about plants with white flowers. White snake root. Why would you ask about that?" Louisa's face showed genuine confusion. "I never asked about white snake root. I don't even know what that is. I asked Ruth about white vervain, which Mother always said was good for nerves." Ruth must have misunderstood. They argued for another hour, neither convincing the other. Samuel wanted desperately to believe his daughter, but the evidence pointed too clearly in one direction. Louisa had had opportunity and potentially motive. She had been preparing drinks for Margaret. She had asked about plants that matched the description of the poison. And Margaret had become ill after consuming those preparations. The logic was inescapable, even if the emotional reality was impossible to accept. The household descended into a cold war after that conversation. Louisa stopped speaking to her father except when absolutely necessary. She stopped preparing anything for Margaret, stopped sitting with her sister, essentially retreated into wounded silence. Samuel found himself trapped between his daughters, unable to fully trust either his suspicions or his daughter's denials. The woman from the auction, who had saved Margaret's life with her knowledge, remained in the fields, working in silence, never asking about the outcome of her diagnosis. 3 weeks after Margaret's recovery began, something happened that would later seem like the first clear warning of stranger events to come. Samuel received an unexpected visitor, James Huger, the planter who had warned him about misfortune at the Charleston auction. Huger arrived in the afternoon alone, claiming to be passing by on his way to a business meeting in Walterboro. But Magnolia Bend was not on the road to Walterboro, and Huger's manner suggested his visit had a different purpose. They sat on the front veranda drinking tea that patients had prepared and spoke of trivial matters for 15 minutes before Huger finally approached his real reason for coming. "Rutledge," he said, his voice careful, "I have been hearing things. Rumors, probably nothing but idle gossip, but they concern you and your household, so I thought I should mention them. What kind of rumors? About the woman you purchased at Ryan's Mart. The $5 woman. People are saying, Huger paused, seeming embarrassed. They are saying she has unusual abilities. That she cured your daughter of an illness that had defeated Dr. Middleton. That she knew things she should not have been able to know. Samuel felt his jaw tighten. My daughter's recovery is due to proper care and God's mercy. Nothing more. Of course, of course. But Rutledge, you must understand how these stories spread, how they get embellished. There are people saying the woman is a conjure woman, that she practices African magic, that she can see things hidden from normal eyes. And once those kinds of rumors start, they attract attention. Dangerous attention. What kind of attention? Huger shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. There are men, planters, merchants, even some professional men, who seek out people with certain skills. Skills that regular medicine or regular channels cannot provide. They pay very well for those skills. And they will come asking about your $5 woman if they have not already. Samuel studied Huger's face, trying to determine what was being said beneath the surface of the words. Are you one of these men, Huger? Is that why you came here? A flash of something, offense perhaps, or recognition, crossed Huger's features. I came to warn you, Rutledge. To tell you that you may have purchased something more valuable and more dangerous than you realized. That woman, whatever she is, whatever she knows, she will bring attention to your plantation. And not all of that attention will be welcome. After Huger left, Samuel called for Priolo and told him about the conversation. The overseer's response was immediate and harsh. I told you that $5 was too cheap. Women like that come with complications. You should sell her before worse happens. Sell her? She saved Margaret's life. Maybe. Or maybe Margaret would have recovered anyway. You're making a judgment based on hope and gratitude, not facts. And hope makes men stupid. Samuel could not deny the logic. But he also could not bring himself to sell someone who had done his family such service, regardless of how that service had been provided. He told Priolo to ensure the woman remained in the fields away from the main house and to report immediately if anyone came asking about her. Then he returned to his study and tried to focus on accounts, trying to ignore the growing sense that something in his ordered, rational world had come loose and was spiraling in directions he could neither predict nor control. Over the following weeks, the rumors Huger had mentioned began to manifest as reality. Men started appearing at Magnolia Bend, always with plausible reasons for their visits, inquiring about purchasing rice, asking directions to neighboring plantations, claiming to be interested in Samuel's farming methods. But their real interest became clear during casual conversations when they would mention the woman, asking in offhand ways whether Samuel was satisfied with his purchase, whether she had demonstrated any unusual skills, whether he might consider selling her for a substantial profit. Samuel refused every inquiry, but the visits continued. A merchant from Jacksonboro offered $200, 40 times what Samuel had paid. A planter from St. Stephen's Parish offered $500. A gentleman from Charleston, whose name Samuel recognized from newspaper articles about banking and shipping, offered $1,000, claiming he needed someone with knowledge of herbal medicine for his wife who suffered from chronic ailments. Each refusal seemed to increase the next offer, and Samuel found himself wondering what would happen when the offers stopped. What would men who were accustomed to getting what they wanted do when polite purchase attempts failed? During this time, something else was happening, though Samuel only understood it in retrospect. The woman from the auction, who still had no name, who still wore the burlap covering, who still worked in the fields, had begun to change the plantation in subtle ways. Workers who had been sullen became more cooperative. Tasks that had been done carelessly were done well. The overseer reported fewer problems, fewer conflicts, fewer reasons to use punishment. It was as though some tension that had always existed at Magnolia Bend had eased, and people were working together instead of merely existing in proximity. Priolo attributed the change to coincidence or possibly to stricter supervision. Samuel wanted to believe the same thing, but he could not ignore that the shift had coincided with the woman's arrival. And he found himself thinking about what Huja had said about unusual abilities. What if the woman's knowledge extended beyond herbs and poisons? What if she understood things about people, about groups, about how to create harmony or discord? What if that knowledge was why she had been isolated before the auction, not because of physical disfigurement, but because of something far more unsettling? The questions kept Samuel awake at night. He began drinking more than usual, a bourbon after dinner that turned into bourbon before dinner, trying to quiet the unease that had taken root in his mind. His relationship with Louisa remained cold. She had never forgiven his suspicions, even though he had never formally accused her of poisoning Margaret. His younger daughter had recovered fully but seemed changed by her illness, more quiet, more watchful, less trusting. The household that had once felt like home now felt like a place where everyone was performing roles they no longer believed in, waiting for something to break. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in early November. Samuel was in his study when he heard Louisa scream. He ran toward the sound, his heart hammering, expecting to find Margaret having another seizure or worse. Instead, he found Louisa in the upstairs hallway, staring into her bedroom with an expression of pure horror. He pushed past her and stopped in the doorway, trying to understand what he was seeing. The woman from the auction stood beside Louisa's bed. The burlap sack lay on the floor, and for the first time since the day at Ryan's Mart, her face was visible. Samuel's mind could not reconcile what his eyes reported. The woman was not disfigured. She was not scarred. Her face was perfectly ordinary, perhaps even beautiful, with strong features and clear eyes and skin that showed no mark of fire or injury. She looked nothing like what the auctioneer had described, nothing like what Samuel had imagined during the month since he had purchased her. She looked like any woman might look, neither remarkable nor monstrous, simply human. But Louisa was screaming, "Monster! Monster! Get it away from me!" And the woman stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable, waiting. Samuel stepped into the room, positioning himself between his daughter and the woman. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "How did you get into the house? Why have you removed your covering?" The woman's voice, when she spoke, had lost its quiet deference. It was strong now, clear, with an accent Samuel had not noticed before, educated, northern inflected, nothing like what he would expect from someone sold for $5. "I came because I needed to speak with Miss Louisa. Because she has been planning something, and I wanted to prevent it. And I removed the sack because it was time for you to understand what you actually purchased. Get out of my room." Louisa shrieked. "Father, make it leave. It's evil. It's not human. It changes." "Changes?" Samuel repeated. "What do you mean, changes?" The woman turned to face him fully, and Samuel felt something shift in his perception, like looking at an optical illusion and suddenly seeing it differently. The woman's face was the same, but also not the same. For a moment, just a fragment of a second, he thought he saw something else beneath the surface, a suggestion of another face, another form, like looking at a reflection in disturbed water. Then the moment passed, and she was simply a woman again, ordinary and unremarkable. "I change," the woman said calmly, "because people see what they expect to see, what they fear to see, or what they need to see. The auctioneer at Ryan's Mart expected to see someone disfigured, so that is what he saw. Your daughter expected to see a monster, so that is what she sees. You expected to see someone damaged but useful, so that is what you have seen. But none of those things are what I am. What I am is more complicated and more dangerous and more valuable than you have imagined." Samuel's hands were shaking. His rational mind rejected what the woman was suggesting, that she could somehow control perception, that she could make people see different things, that reality itself might be malleable in her presence. But his eyes had seen that moment of shift, and his gut told him he was facing something he did not understand and could not control. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "I want to make a bargain with you, Mr. Rutledge. I saved your daughter's life. I have improved your plantation's productivity. I have harmed no one and worked honestly in your fields. In return, I ask for 3 things: my freedom, legal documentation of that freedom, and $50 for travel expenses. Give me those things, and I will leave tonight. Refuse, and the men who have been coming to visit you will continue to come, and their offers will turn to threats, and eventually they will take what they want by force or trickery. You cannot protect me from them, but you can choose to release me before their patience ends." Behind Samuel, Louisa had stopped screaming and was crying instead, harsh sobs that shook her entire body. Margaret appeared in the hallway, drawn by the noise, her face pale and frightened. Priolo came up the stairs carrying the rifle he kept in his house. And the woman stood in the center of the room, perfectly calm, waiting for Samuel's decision. Samuel made his choice in that moment, though he would spend years questioning whether it was the right one. He told Priolo to lower the rifle. He told his daughters to go downstairs and wait in the parlor. And he asked the woman to follow him to his study so they could speak privately. In the study, with the door closed and a single lamp burning on the desk, Samuel poured himself bourbon and drank it in one swallow before speaking. "Tell me the truth. All of it. Who you are, what you are, why you were sold for $5. I will not make a bargain with you until I understand what I am bargaining with." The woman sat in the chair across from his desk, her posture relaxed but alert. "My name is Ada. I was born in Pennsylvania to a free family. My mother was a seamstress, my father a carpenter. I learned to read and write, studied herbs and healing from my grandmother, and lived an ordinary life until I was 17. That was when I discovered I had an ability that most people do not have and cannot understand. I could make people see things differently, not illusions exactly, more like adjustments to perception. If someone expected me to be beautiful, they would see beauty. If they expected ugliness, they would see scars. If they expected ordinariness, I would disappear into the background. The ability was not something I could control well at first. It simply happened, responding to the strongest emotions around me. "That is impossible," Samuel said. But his voice lacked conviction. "Many things are impossible until you see them happen," Ada replied. "I learned to control my ability over time. I learned to choose what people saw. I learned to protect myself with it. But I also learned that the ability made me dangerous to myself and others. When people discovered what I could do, they wanted to use me as a spy, a manipulator, a tool for their own purposes. Some wanted to display me as a curiosity. Others wanted to study me. The worst ones wanted to own me completely, to control what I could do and turn it toward their own ends. So I ran. I changed my appearance, moved south, tried to disappear. But I made a mistake. I trusted someone in Virginia who promised to help me reach a Quaker community in North Carolina. Instead, he sold me to a slave trader, claiming I was his runaway property. There was no proof to dispute his claim. I was simply declared property. And property I remained. Ada paused, and Samuel saw genuine emotion cross her face for the first time, something like sorrow or regret. The trader who purchased me in Virginia realized quickly that I was unusual. He tried to sell me several times, but I made sure potential buyers saw someone they did not want: disease, madness, hidden defects. He became frustrated and angry. He kept me isolated, covered, told other traders I was damaged beyond sale. Eventually, he died of influenza, and his estate included me among the assets to be liquidated. That is how I ended up at Ryan's Mart with instructions to keep my face covered, instructions I had planted in his mind before he died, ensuring I would not be examined too closely. I was hoping to be purchased by someone relatively kind who I could escape from easily. Instead, I ended up here. Samuel listened to the story, trying to find holes in it, trying to preserve his rationality against the evidence of his own eyes. If you could make people see what you wanted, why did you let yourself be sold at all? Why not make them see a white woman, someone they could not legally enslave? Because that level of deception requires enormous concentration and cannot be maintained for long. I can adjust perception, Mr. Rutledge, but I cannot entirely rewrite reality. Someone paying close attention would see inconsistencies, discrepancies. And if I had tried to claim I was white and free, there would have been investigations, questions, demands for documentation I could not provide. It was safer to remain property and hope for an opportunity to escape. What I did not anticipate was your daughter's poisoning, or that my intervention would draw the kind of attention that has now made escape nearly impossible. Why did you help Margaret? Ada smiled slightly. Because she reminded me of my younger sister, who I will probably never see again. Because I could not watch a child die when I had the knowledge to save her. Because, despite everything that has happened to me, I still believe some actions are right regardless of consequence. Choose your reason, Mr. Rutledge. They are all true. They sat in silence for several minutes, Samuel refilling his glass and drinking more slowly this time. Finally, he spoke. If I free you, what happens to the men who have been coming here? Will they leave me alone? Eventually, yes. Without me here, their interest in your plantation ends. They may be angry initially, but that anger will be directed at me, not you. You can claim I ran away, that you searched but could not find me. They will believe you, or at least they will accept the loss and move on. Men like that are accustomed to occasional defeats. They consider them the cost of doing business. And my daughters? Louisa especially. She seems terrified of you. What did she see when she looked at your face? Ada's expression became carefully neutral. I cannot control what people see when they look at me, Mr. Rutledge. I can only influence it. Miss Louisa saw what she fears most, her own face reflected back at her with all the ugliness of her actions visible. She saw herself as a poisoner, a sister who tried to murder for advantage. Whether that reflection was accurate or merely her own guilt made visible, I do not know. But what she saw was something within her, not something I created. Samuel felt his stomach twist. So you believe Louisa poisoned Margaret? I believe your older daughter was desperate and made a terrible choice. I believe she regrets it now. I believe she will carry that guilt forever. But I also believe that if you keep me here, if you do not release me, your household will tear itself apart because I force people to see truths they do not want to see. I am a mirror, Mr. Rutledge. I reflect what is already there. Some people cannot bear their own reflections. Samuel granted Ada her freedom that night. He wrote the manumission papers himself, documenting that the woman known as Number 39, also called Ada, was hereby released from bondage as compensation for services rendered to his family. He gave her $75, more than she had requested, and told her she could take one of the plantation's older horses for transportation. He did not tell his daughters what he was doing until after Ada had left, riding north toward Charleston with a pack of supplies and the legal papers that proved her freedom. Louisa's reaction was explosive. She accused her father of choosing a stranger over his own flesh and blood, of believing lies and malicious insinuations, of betraying his family for a creature that was not even fully human. Samuel let her rage until the words ran dry, and then he asked her a single question: "Did you poison your sister?" Louisa's face went through several transformations, fury to shock to something that might have been despair. She did not answer with words. She simply turned and walked away. And Samuel knew in that moment that Ada had been right. His daughter had tried to kill her own sister, and the guilt of that action would define her forever. Margaret recovered fully over the following months, though she never spoke about the period of her illness except to say she remembered very little. Samuel told her that Louisa had been confused about which plants were safe, that the poisoning had been an accident born of ignorance rather than malice. Whether Margaret believed him, he never knew. The relationship between the sisters never recovered its former warmth. And when Louisa married 2 years later to a merchant from Georgetown, a marriage arranged through connections and desperation rather than affection, Margaret did not attend the wedding. The men who had been visiting Magnolia Bend stopped coming after Ada's departure. Samuel heard nothing more about his $5 purchase, though occasionally at church or in Charleston he would catch whispered fragments of conversation that suggested her story had become legend. Some said she had been a witch. Others claimed she was an angel sent to test men's souls. A few swore she had been entirely ordinary and that all the strange stories were nonsense invented by superstitious people. Samuel never corrected anyone or added his own account. He kept Ada's manumission papers in a locked drawer and spoke of her to no one except in vague terms when asked directly. Magnolia Bend Plantation continued its operations for another decade before Samuel sold it and moved to Charleston to be closer to Margaret, who had married a lawyer and given him 3 grandchildren. Louisa lived in Georgetown until 1863, when Union forces occupied the town and her merchant husband fled to England. She returned briefly to Charleston during the war's final year and stayed with Samuel for 3 months, during which time she and Margaret maintained a cold politeness that broke Samuel's heart. Louisa died in 1867 of complications from influenza, and Samuel paid for her burial in the family plot at St. Bartholomew's next to Catherine. The records of what happened at Magnolia Bend in 1847 to 1848 were scattered across various locations: court documents in one archive, plantation records in another, private correspondence in family trunks that would not be opened for generations. The story of the $5 woman became fragmented, distorted, transformed by retelling until the truth was buried under layers of myth and speculation. Some descendants of the families involved claim no such person ever existed. Others insist the entire incident was fabricated by abolitionists trying to discredit the plantation system. Official records are curiously incomplete, with pages missing from auction logs and county files. But in 1902, a journalist researching unusual property cases in South Carolina found Samuel Ruttle's manumission papers for Ada in a collection of documents donated to the Charleston Library Society. The papers included Ada's full name, Ada Marie Freeman, and noted her birthplace as Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The journalist attempted to trace Ada's movements after 1848 but found nothing definitive. A woman matching her description appeared in Underground Railroad documents from 1849, helping escaped slaves reach freedom in the North. Another possible sighting placed her in Philadelphia in 1852 working as a nurse during a cholera outbreak. The last potential reference came from an 1871 letter written by a Quaker teacher in Ohio, mentioning a woman named Ada who ran a school for freed slaves and who had an unusual ability to help her students feel confident and valued regardless of their circumstances. Whether these references all pointed to the same person, or whether Ada Freeman disappeared into the vast American landscape and became one of thousands of people who lived and died without leaving clear traces, no historian has ever determined with certainty. What remains is Samuel Ruttle's journal entry from the night he freed her, written in handwriting that showed the effects of bourbon and emotion. Tonight I released the woman I purchased for $5. I do not know if she was what she claimed to be, or if I simply saw what she wanted me to see. I do not know if she had supernatural abilities or merely the courage and intelligence to survive impossible circumstances. What I know is this: she saved my daughter's life and showed me that I had raised another daughter capable of murder. She held up a mirror to my household and forced me to see truths I had been avoiding. Whether that makes her saint or demon or simply human, I cannot judge. I only know that after she left, my plantation seemed emptier, darker, as though something that had brought light, however uncomfortable, had been extinguished. God forgive me if I made the wrong choice. God help me if I made the right one. This mystery shows us that the most terrifying aspects of human nature often hide behind the faces we think we know, and that truth can be far stranger and more unsettling than any supernatural explanation. The story of Ada Freeman, if that was truly her name, reminds us that American history contains countless episodes that resist simple categorization, events that seem impossible until we recognize that human capability, whether for good or evil, extends far beyond what we typically acknowledge. What do you think of this story? Do you believe Ada Freeman had genuine abilities? Or was she simply a brilliant survivor who understood human psychology better than those around her? Do you think Louisa actually tried to poison Margaret, or could there be another explanation? Leave your comment below with your theories. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and share this video with someone who loves mysteries that blur the line between history and legend. The past is filled with stories that demand to be told, and we'll keep bringing them to you, one dark secret at a time. See you in the next video.